Hi, everybody. We're going to talk today about making change happen in a system that doesn't want to. I think probably most of us here have had some experience of that, but we're going to go through some of the things that we've found in our experience, both inside public digital and in our careers before then. Should we go next? I'm Alex Blandford. I've been with Public Digital about 6 months. Before that, I was head of product for the University of Cambridge and a few other places like NHS, well, not head of product for, but contracting for NHSX, GDS, Department for Education, a few places roundabout.
And I'm Katherine. I'm also at Public Digital, where I'm a senior director and I lead our design practice, but also lead the work we do in the private sector. Before that, I was at Co-op. I think there's a few people from Co-op here. And I led design and customer experience in my time there.
So let's be honest. No one actually likes change. It's not fun. You don't like change if you think about it really hard. We only resort to it when the reason for change beats the ease of keeping things the same as they are at the moment. And change is hard, and you're always going to be coming up against people who don't want it to happen.
So through our work, we found that actually there's a set of levers that are the things that can help you to push change through. And you need to make sure across these levers there's a really good balance. You don't necessarily need all of these levers, but you do need to have them in a way that's working so that they balance one another out. Because if you find you're leaning too hard on one of those levers, you pull it too hard, you might be left with nothing. And you might be left with an organisation that's just really annoyed at what you've been trying to push through. So each of these levers can move things forward, but also each one of them comes with risks. And it's all about knowing which ones to lean on, assessing what's happening, reading the room, reading the organisation, and figuring out where to build. If you've got power and you've got friends in combination, you'll be able to move really quickly, and you'll also be doing that with people by your side. If you've got the skills to do the work and you've got the opportunity for a big change to happen, you'll be able to turn the ambition that you've got into delivering outcomes. And if you've got enough money, you've got enough influence, you'll be able to shift priorities, and you'll also be able to open doors to more opportunities. And if you've got the influence across the organisation and you've also got the skills to do the work, you'll be able to set the direction and most critically be able to deliver on it. So the first of these levers, power, this is the one that is probably the most obvious. It's really useful, but equally it can be really dangerous, and it can also be quite temporary. Power really gets things moving, and it helps to force a new change to happen across the organisation. But there's always a risk it doesn't last. It can walk out the door with whoever gave you the power in the first place, and if you use it too heavily, you might be left with nothing but resentment across the organisation and a list of people who want to do all the work that you push forward and all the change that you've been trying to make. So if you're using power as your main lever, make sure you're also building legitimacy, make sure you're building friends and the influence while you've still got the time. Unless, of course, you're planning to leave. If you're planning to leave, there's actually value in being the person who gets the blame later. Sometimes it's useful to have that scapegoat. So sometimes you'll find you have power, you've got backing, you've got budget, so you can push through radical change really fast. But more often, and it's usually the case in organisations, you'll find you have to work gradually. You'll have to make friends, you'll have to win trust, and you have to build that influence much more slowly. So typically, we've found there's two routes for change. The first is about breaking a hole through the organisation. It's a really bold, a really visible shift that significantly changes the organisation in what can feel like overnight. Or the other route is influencing your way to change. This is much slower, it's much steadier. It's about conversations, it's about trust, and it's about getting the timing right. Neither of these two is better than the other, and actually, they're kind of quite often phases that follow one another. Sometimes they're even phases of the same effort, and you might purposely make shifts as you move through the transformation between these two routes.
So I don't know if you've ever worked somewhere where somebody says no one ever gets fired here. I certainly have. And it goes both ways. It's a kind of exercise of personal power that somebody is trying to say, like, I cannot be got rid of. Whenever I had people at Cambridge say to me, I will be here long after you are gone and your ideas are gone. Like kind of imagining that they're like a statue that's going to weather a sandstorm. But remember, this kind of goes both ways. Somebody starts pulling this card on you, you are able to exercise that power yourself. If no one gets fired here, then you can use that as a way to start putting your ideas forward, even if they're a bit more radical than the organisation is used to, because people aren't going to start going, this is too outlandish, and start pulling you back. So with Cambridge, there was an issue where not that anyone has tenure in academic posts in the UK anymore, but there were contractual things that meant that people were more or less tenured as administrators. It was phenomenally difficult for them to have their job description changed. And there was a culture of never letting people go. I had one point where the HR team said to me that it wasn't legal to not renew a contractor, which was great for those contractors. But it's a culture of never, you're in there a culture of never properly saying yes to anything and never properly saying no to anything. But it means you can start moving. You can start putting that stuff together and using power inside the organisation to start making gradual change. But you also have to watch out for the slow no. So if you don't have a strong yes and you don't have a strong no, you kind of just coast. You just sort of slide through meetings where people go, I guess. And you'll end up with the most frustrating outcome of all, because you might then turn up with something that's a bit further along, where you go, okay, well, we've done this prototype, we've had some ideas, now we have to do the actual change of the way that we do things in the organisation, and suddenly, then you hit the wall, or then you find that there's no money available, or then you find that all those other levers of power that you haven't put together, no longer there. So, within our client practice, we had a large higher education organisation in the UK who were trying to do a lot of things like devolving power to agile teams and trying to create a culture of continuous improvement and delivery. But the power wasn't actually with the teams. They could meet, they could do stand-ups, they could trim their own backlog, but they had to come back in to the governance of the organisation. Everything came back to asking for permission. Everything, and it was never there. It was never, there was never an enthusiastic, yes, we've told you how to go, we've told you to go for this, we've told you this is the direction we want to go, off you pop. It was a, I guess, which slows everything down, starts it, stops it, starts it, stops it, and drags all of that team into a perpetual loop of governancing and feeding paperwork to a machine that doesn't do much with it. So the next lever we've got is skills. And this is not on its own, enough on its own, but it's also non-negotiable. You can't deliver with just the vibes of being a bit agile and being a bit digital. You need hard skills of people who know how to deliver this stuff. Skills can't be dropped in like Lego bricks into a wall. If you're bringing in capability from the outside, you're going to be threatening people who are already there. The implication that you're giving people is often that you don't trust them, or that they aren't going to get to where you think this journey goes. So you need to think about how you're going to settle people into that space. Sometimes that's how you do coaching, and sometimes that's whether or not you pull people out into their own sort of skunk works or innovation space that's separate from the organisation, and both of those have downsides, but in terms of delivery speed or in terms of the acceptance that you'll get for the work that's delivered. But you have to think so hard about how the skills you're going to land work. The way I like to think about skills is about thinking about the best day of work you've ever had, or working with the best team you've ever worked with. There are 2 or 3 that I've worked with in my life where everything has gone fantastically. I've wanted to turn up for work. I've wanted to see the delivery that we're doing, and where our work was valuable. But those have relied on quite a few kind of conditions to be met, and one of them is really about knowing how to work together. That's not being fussy about your disciplinary boundaries. Best team I had was a tech arc who used to help me with user research. Not the actual questions, but like came scribing, came asking questions, would do the affinity sorting after the session. People going, this is something which we do together, even if you don't always know the perfect way of doing a particular thing. There's also something about emotional support. Teams that aren't in a healthy and safe place together won't be able to deliver together, and especially when, going back to Jukesy's talk earlier, in a culture of open delivery, If you don't have that psychological safety among the team, you're not going to be able to get to a point where people feel safe talking honestly about weak notes or talking honestly about what's going well and what's going wrong. And critically, it's the right mix of skills. It's great for people to be learning new skills, but you're going to need to have enough people with expertise to actually get the work done. Not everybody can be learning and upskilling from scratch. I love this quote, and I kind of whisper it to myself as I come out of quite a lot of governance meetings. But you're going to come across this quite a lot. Often people are coming into a system where there is an inertia towards what is there currently. When you bring in a new skill, you're not just bringing in one person. You're saying, okay, now we need to have a career development tree for that job path. We need to think about job families. We need to think about how we're going to skill people up. So when you're doing that kind of work with skills, you then need to start playing along with finance. You need to start playing along with HR. And you need to start building those alliances so that people see that it's something that's not just thrown in haphazardly. And change is incredibly hard to land when the safer option is to just do nothing. And even trying to change things can feel risky, especially in cultures where effort and reward are not recognised. It's obviously gauche to talk about money, but I think we should probably go and do it. It's freedom, in this case, it's leverage, and it's a seat at the table. It can buy you things, it can buy you people to come in to be those skills that you need. It can pay for things like the tools you're going to need. If you're trying to manage a digital transformation in Excel, you are going to struggle as the affordances of the software will push you in a particular direction. But it'll cover the costs of things that you might not otherwise be able to afford, and it can buy you a little bit of influence because you can help out other teams as long as you bring them along with you. And it can back up your proposals with real delivery rather than just sort of vague promises that things will be better in the future if we do it in a digital or agile or user-centered design, or pick your poison of whichever word you use to get this through. You can't make change happen without at least some money. If you don't have much, you'll need to lean hard on the other levers that we've been talking about. And if you have enough, you need to use it very wisely and prioritize delivering value early that helps other teams. Money will help you create the opportunities to prove that the new ways of working you're proposing are better than the old ways of working. But crucially, it can buy you skills. And if you're really sneaky as well, it can buy you a bit of influence.
So in the digital transformation that happened at Co-op, and is still happening, probably will always be happening, it started with a big break through the organisation. It started with a lot of power, a lot of money, and a lot of effort to bring new skills into the organisation and also upskill people across the organisation. But at the point when that power shifted and a lot of people in very senior positions who backed this left the organisation, we were left in a position where that had all gone. The money had gone, the power had gone. What did we have left? We still had the skills left, we still had some level of influence, we still did have some friends left. But at this point, we had no real option other than moving to that second route, which was much more about influencing our way to change. So making friends, going out, working together, going out, helping to bring skills and invite people into the workshops we were doing. Both of those phases had value. The first big break through the organisation with the money and the power, I don't think the second phase would have been possible without that, but equally, that second phase is far more sustainable. Making the friendship and going and working with us across the organisation meant that it spread beyond digital and it spread beyond the change that was sort of siloed within what was Federation House at that particular point and into Angel Square, which is the main co-op building. Another organisation, and actually most organisations that we work with at Public Digital, in all honesty, they're trying to do that big break, but without the power, the money and the backing to really do that. And I think if you don't have that money, you just cannot do that big break. And I think it's really important to recognise that in the approach that you're taking. So while you might have radical ambition, it's not going to be fast without the money to back you. And it's much more about influencing at that point.
I feel Matt's covered this off pretty well, but you're going to be really annoying. Just by being there, by being a bit different, it's going to put people's backs up. You're coming in, I sometimes talk about the institutional immune system, and when I was a contractor, turning up with a MacBook with stickers on it to an IT team with a load of Dells was like you could just feel this instant. If you go in there and say, you know, with my trainers on, with my MacBook, advocating for using Google in the old days, or Slack, or no suits at work, or weak notes, stand-ups, talking to people directly, optimism, and asking why like a toddler, yeah, you're going to be really annoying. And you need to understand that that plays on your influence level as well, that is going to wibble around how much influence you have in the organization. Senior influence gives you this sort of illusion of safety. It can feel like a superpower. You've got somebody in the senior management of the organization who goes, this team, these transformation people, they're my people. They're going to change how the organization works. And you think, this is amazing. And then they leave. Priorities might shift. There might be, I mean, plenty of people in this room work or have worked in government, and goodness me, can policies change quite quickly when governments change quite quickly. Ideally, you want to spread your bets with influence, but that's not always possible. Some organizations are highly centralized, and you've just got to make it work with who's in the room. But if influence is your main lever, you need to make sure that you've got something else, you've got something underneath it. You need friends, you need skills, you need money. Something that means the whole thing doesn't fall apart the moment your sponsor walks out the door. The other side of this is trying to be a victim of your own success. It's often when you're making products, you know, that old GDS thing of, you know, services so good people prefer to use them. Like, you can try and make the things you are doing in transformation look fun. You can try and make going to work look, I mean, I know this is dreadfully nerdy, but like, look fun. It might be fun to turn up to work. You might get to work with people you think of as, like, if not friends, then good colleagues. I'm always cautious about this because of the whole kind of, work will never love you back thing. But you can like work. But you want people in the organisation to look over at your teams and say, that looks like a good day at work. And envy will go a long way to helping you be influential.
So this is a retailer that I'm working with at the moment, not Co-op. And we found when we first started working with them, they had a lot of ambition for the transformation they're trying to do to what they call their end-to-end operation. But no one else in the organisation was really interested. Like, the tools they were using were a bit annoying, the processes they were using were a bit annoying, things weren't quite right, but that wasn't where their passion was. Their passion wasn't in those systems and processes, their passion was in the retail they were doing. So the shift that we made was much more about working in the open, telling stories, making it visible, and critically using visual communication to do that. So showing the thing out on the wall, having big service maps that help people to visually understand it, visually get behind it, and communicate in a way that's much more creative. That shift meant that people started to naturally join that transformation of the operation and start to get behind it, and actually came to the point where they now cannot keep up with demand for support from the rest of the organisation, and has fundamentally shifted the perception, which was really needed because it just wouldn't have happened without the support of the other colleagues. It couldn't have happened on its own.
So also you need to think about your context in the organisation. If you're coming into this and you're kind of junior to mid-level, there's going to be loads and loads and loads of things you do not know about that are happening in meetings that you're not invited to. That could be that there are interpersonal conflicts, or there's a change in legislation coming in, change in money, change in anything going on whatsoever. And that's going to affect what you're doing, but no one's ever going to tell you about it. And sometimes you have to be able to chalk up a little bit of, there's something happening that I don't know about. But on the other side, if you're senior, you absolutely 100% do not know what's going on. You don't know. You see an org chart, you see a load of people who are in your teams. You might see that some of them work for you in a 3 levels down. Do you know who's having a good time at home? Do you know who's coming in late? Do you know who's actually quite crap at their job but talks a good game? You don't know any of that. You might, but you probably don't. So being aware that absolutely everybody involved in this doesn't actually know the whole story, and that plays out in their situational awareness means that they are constantly throwing around to try and work out what the right shape of the team should be, but they might not get it right.
So none of the other levers matter if you've not got opportunity. There has to be a reason why the organisation and the people in the organisation might want to do something a bit differently. So that could be a new strategy or leadership. It could be a major failure or review. It could be budget pressures or money challenges. It could be some regulatory changes. Or hopefully, best of all, it could be a major customer problem that the whole organisation can get behind, and you can push the change by demonstrating you'll be able to fix that. There has to be a better reason than because everyone is doing digital. On a macro scale, on a wide scale, people need to recognise why the change you're pushing for matters. It has to offer some benefit to their customers, it has to offer some benefit to the organisation, it has to offer some benefit to them and their teams personally. But on a more micro, a smaller scale, people need to believe in the work that's right in front of them, the work that you might be asking them to do, or the change, the new project, the new products, or the service. So the reality is not everyone is going to understand what you're talking about the first time you say it. You're going to have to keep repeating things. And that's totally understandable. You know, I'm sure everyone else in the organisation has got changes they're trying to push for. And you'll have thought about the transformation and the change that you're trying to create much more than lots of other people have, not because you're better than them or they're not as clever as you, but because that's where you've been focusing your energy. So you'll find you need to keep repeating things so that people are able to understand it, and at a point where their timing is right for them to understand it. So another example from Co-op, we'd been taking, there's a big transformation happening in funeral care. There'd been lots of progress, but we'd been taking a bigger shift around what was called client experience or customer experience and service design. While people kind of theoretically understood what we were talking about, and broadly speaking, we get nods in meetings and they're kind of like, yeah, crack on, have a go. It didn't really properly get any traction, and it was only really the moment when some big regulatory changes came in when you could actually start to properly see that through. So the thing that I really learned from that is sometimes it's just not the right moment. That doesn't mean you shouldn't keep pushing, it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've not been heard, and it doesn't necessarily mean that people are purposefully ignoring you. Another example from Co-op was we didn't have enough permanent roles in-house. There were way too many contractors. Obviously, all companies are going to need contractors to some degree, but the balance has to be right between cultivating talent in-house, making sure you've got a strong pipeline, making sure that the knowledge is retained in-house. And when you've got too many contractors, that balance can't happen properly. So we've been pushing for these roles for a long, long time, and we decided to do one last push. And in all honesty, I really didn't expect to get it through. We had roles, I think it was about 35 roles altogether, right from apprentices, which was a new introduction, through to principal level. And somehow, entirely unexpectedly, they just got approved like that. And I think it was down to all the hard work that everyone had done over the years, where it kind of got to the point where they recognised the value in it. And also, we had a really solid financial case beneath that.
But building on that, sometimes it's just not the right time. You need to know what the moment looks like, the moment of change in an organisation. Sometimes things are lined up, sometimes things are going to work, and sometimes they're not. And being able to kind of tell the difference between the two is going to be really important for you personally, because you're going to be the one in the organisation, and you need to be able to separate out what's gone wrong with, if you try and land a perfect plan that would normally work, and it doesn't because the circumstances are wrong, that's not that you screwed it up, that's not that you messed up the planning. Sometimes the organisation just isn't going to be ready for what you want to say to them. There is absolutely nowhere in 2025 that hasn't had a failed digital transformation under its belt by now. Every single organisation you go and work in will have some people who twitch when you say agile or service design or scrum or whatever the thing is. They'll have done it and it was painful and they hate it and they don't want you to do it. So you're going to end up coding your words or talking about user centricity when you mean service design, or talking about test and learn when you mean, Scrum iterations or all the rest of it. Nowhere is a greenfield site, and that's fine. I don't think, maybe it never was, and we're just sort of valorizing the past. You need to look for organizational red flags as part of that, because you're going to be in an organization that might well throw some up. The slow no earlier is one of them. But you need to keep at the front of your mind that you're working with organisations that are in flux, that are changing. And you need to watch for toxic organisational behaviours and think about how they can understand your work to transform the organisation, but also your personal ability to do that, to stick it out and to stay there.
Friends are the most resilient lever you can have. If you've got enough friends, it's not possible for those people to be reorganised out. They'll also help you to make sense of what's happening and keep you grounded when nothing feels stable. Everything feels like it's shifting all the time. So if you've got no power, you've got no money, and you've got no influence, friends are really your only route forward. So focus on building those coalitions. Make sure you're finding people who want the same thing, even if it might not be in quite the same way as you, but if the foundational level is the same, go with that. And most of all, kindness goes an awful long way. If you can be friendly, you can be open, and you can be dependable, that's how you start to build trust across the organisation. And also, that's the way to get people to back you when it feels really risky to do that. It's really important to not just focus on the only team, like the team that you're in or the team that you're leading. You need to make sure that you're celebrating people from across the organisation. What you do not want to do is build a clique. There will be points in any transformation when that naturally happens, but try to break that down. Try to make sure that you're finding enough friends outside of your corner of the organisation and you're building that. So look left and right and look at the people who are your peers alongside you, the people who might be at the same level but in other parts of the organisation. They're your team, not just the people who sit within the team that you're in within a unit. It's really important to try and keep your tent open. You don't necessarily need total alignment. It's just about having a shared direction and a mutual respect so that you can move forward together. That help needs to go both ways. So while you might be asking other people to change, what help are you offering back to them? How are you making sure that they're also getting what they need? And when you run into culture or method clashes, try to find what's underneath it. That's totally normal, but look for shared values underneath different ways of working. I mean, the most important thing of all is just to go and sit at a desk next to somebody that you don't know, someone working in a different team, and just go and talk to them and build up those coalitions, build up those groups, and build up the people who are going to support you as friends across the organisation, or as Alex mentioned before, good colleagues. It's really important to always listen to feedback, but make sure you're careful about whose feedback you listen to, and try not to let it pull you down. I always try to see all feedback I might get as a signal. It's important to listen to it, but it doesn't necessarily make it fact, it doesn't necessarily make it truth. The most important people to listen to are the people who are also willing to put themselves out there, the people who are willing to step up, the people who are willing to take a risk. And I think within an organisation, I've got huge respect for the people who've been there for a long, long time, and yet they're willing to continue to embrace change, they're willing to continue to adapt. Those are the people who are continually able to put themselves out there, and they're the ones who in the long term will get change through. But across all of these levers, the one thing that we didn't mention is you. It's really important that you look at how you're behaving, you look at what your influence is across the organisation, and also look at how you're managing yourself. You can't take things personally if people resist or misunderstand. That's not necessarily about you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong, but it equally doesn't mean that it's focused on you personally. And failing doesn't mean that you personally have failed. It might not have been the right time. It might not have been the right moment. It might not have been a big enough opportunity. And the frustration you might feel, I felt such massive frustration, supporting the organisations I support through Public Digital, but at times at Co-op, at times at BBC before that. That frustration is really real, and it's going to happen, and you need to listen to it, but try not to let it turn into anger. I think the moment it turns into anger, that's the moment when it starts to go wrong, and that's the moment when you might be possibly taking it too personally. So another story from Co-op. I was there for 5.5 years. I think 3 years into it, I got to the point where I couldn't keep going, so I handed my notice in. I got a job somewhere else, and I was going to leave. So I was working my 3 months' notice, and partway through that 3 months' notice, COVID happened. The company I was supposed to be going to, didn't look like they'd be that stable, and I started to have doubts about whether this was a good idea. It ended up going that I extended my notice for a further 6 months in total, and within that time, I recognised I needed to stay at the Co-op. That was where I couldn't afford not to have a job, and I needed to stay there. Luckily, I'd done my very best to leave on good terms. The thing that I cared about in that moment was really about the teams that I worked with and making sure that they were in a good place, and the last thing I wanted to do was walk out and leave them in a worse position. And because of that, I asked my boss for my job back, and they said yes. But actually, during that 6 months, when I thought I was leaving and I was trying to leave things in a good place, I realised that I'd been far too emotionally attached to what we were trying to do at Co-op, and I realised that that was clouding my judgment, and that was also clouding the stories that I was telling myself. So that emotional distance that I gathered in that 6 months where I thought I was leaving and I wanted to leave things in a good place, I managed to get so many things through. A lot of those changes I talked about before were during that 6-month period. Because that emotional distance, it just helped to make me a better leader. And I think whenever I can feel myself getting too frustrated, too angry, I try to look at, am I too emotionally attached to this? Am I looking at things objectively?
You also need to avoid becoming the angry person in the cupboard. When I started in the public sector, my first job, back when there was a load of ginger stuff going up here, and I worked in UK Parliament, and I was given the poison chalice of running the UK Parliament's Hack Day. And I thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to do something exciting. It's going to be interesting. We're going to get to play with data, which I did not understand at that point. And my team said, you need to go and talk to this guy. He's been here 10, 15 years. He ran something like this before. Why don't you go and have a chat with him? He'll tell you all about how to do it. So go on the email, sort out a lunch with him, go for lunch. And he sits me down for lunch and goes, it's going to be shit. You're going to hate it. It's going to be terrible, and it's not going to change a thing. It's a waste of your time. This place will never change. He wasn't wrong, but it won't work. Somebody relatively fresh-faced coming in, who's got some ideas, who's got a bit of vim and vigour, there's this temptation, I think, when you're really pissed off with an organisation that won't do anything, to go, anyone coming in through the door like, welcome to hell, you're going to have a crap time. And it just breaks your spirit. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is to actually pull it back and go a little bit like, okay, yeah, this is a complex organisation. There are things going wrong. There are things that are going to be extremely annoying. But here's what I learnt doing this thing when I ran up against it and, you know, broke my leg kicking the door. Like, you can have a go too, and, you know, maybe you might not get it right, but then the person after you might get it right, but maybe you'll get it right. Give it a try. But that kind of thing of trying to see the space, not just focusing on no.
So quite a lot of the time, you might see the system that you're working in as the enemy, but actually your own take and the stories you're telling yourself can often be the biggest problem. So in the instance where I talked about Co-op before, at the point I left, I'd started imagining people were out to get me, people were out to get the teams, and while some of the behaviours that were happening and the things that happened were real, the intent behind it wasn't necessarily the same as I was interpreting it. So I think it's really important to sort of step back and check what's happening, read the signals, but try not to take it too personally. Another organisation that we worked with, we'd been pushing for a big transformation, and there were some really, really loud voices opposing the direction. We felt it was all going wrong, and there was a real consideration of like just scrapping the whole thing, doing something entirely different. We then, as part of the work we were doing anyway, ended up running a series of workshops, and that was to get input from across the organisation on sort of the direction and the sort of the next steps. And we were so shocked to find that actually there were loads of supporters out there were loads of people who were backing this and wanting to happen. So I think the lesson in that is, while there might be loud voices opposing it, there are always going to be some loud voices opposing it. So it's important to choose who you listen to and make sure you're getting the view from the whole organisation and not just the people who are shouting at you. So when you do have those moments where you're very frustrated, because that's going to happen, try to channel that into actually doing something about it. If you're going to complain about something, make sure you've actually tried to do it, do something about it. Don't keep complaining about it if there's no way to fix it or you're not willing to be the one to step up and fix it. So all those levers that we mentioned before, they're really important to have them in balance, and they're really important to figure out how to use them together and have a continuous awareness of which ones you have and which ones you don't have. If you get them in quite the wrong order, bad things can happen. So if you've got power, but you've got no friends, you might be making fast progress, but equally, you might get fast backlash when things go wrong. If you've got skills to do the work, but there's no opportunity, you're going to have a really talented team who at any moment could leave because they're frustrated. If you've got the money, but you don't have the influence to put that money to good use, you might end up with a funded side project that no one really cares about, no one really listens to. And if you've got influence but you've not got the skills, you might have ambitious plans. They might be very clever, ambitious plans, but you're just not going to be able to deliver on them. And the riskiest one of all is when you've got power, but you've got no friends, because this one can feel really good. It can feel like everything's working really well, but you might not be able to get that impact through. So it'd be really lovely for there to be a magic answer to the end of this. The reality is there isn't one. Change is really hard. It's about making sure you've got a balance across all the levers you've got, keeping an awareness of them, and using them in a way that makes it possible to push things through, keeping an eye on what ones you've got, and doing the hard work that's needed to strengthen each of them. So I think for all of you here who are probably working through change, it's really important to make the most of conferences like this, because by speaking to other people, by learning from their experiences, by getting inspiration from their successes, and also by supporting one another, that's what will get you through. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, throughout that talk, I think I just kept thinking, I'm in this picture and I don't like it. But lots of great war stories there. Are you okay for a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Alex and Katherine, please. Is anyone? Kat, you want questions on this side? Is that all right?
Put your hand up. Hi.
Hi. How would you best, this is on the topic of friends, how would you best recommend building new relationships, work relationships, outside of your immediate team when you work in a fully remote organisation and often find your individual work quite siloed from the rest of the wider organisation?
I mean, one of the things that I've seen worked quite well is, I guess, most teams who are trying to do something new will have various upskilling workshops, so things where you might be learning about, I don't know, service mapping or user research techniques. I think if you can open those up to the rest of the organisation, like I've quite often found that other people will put their hands up for it, and it also, it helps to sort of share the budget. Lots of other leaders in those sections might be grateful for the sharing of that, but then individuals who come along, it kind of offers you a moment for them to benefit from that training, but also gives you a window to talk to them about what the thing is that they're trying to fix.
I agree with that. There's also trying to find some ways of putting in unstructured time that's about specifically building communities around, especially around digital transformation. There are teams inside organisations like finance and HR that are kind of entirely dependent on the affordances of software. If you start going outside your boundaries and go like, hey, we're going to have a lunch and learn where we talk about this, or we're going to have a read a blog post book club type, like you can do little things that maybe start to bring people in, and I appreciate that there's a certain level of trust from them that they also need to make that jump in, but it's about kind of not just having an open door, but providing them space that's going to be interesting for them to come in.
One more quick question.
Right, thank you. When I first started working, which was quite a while ago now, people used to go in for 2-3 year digital transformation programs. But my experience since then is that those kind of programs rarely last, because either key personnel change or organizational priorities changed, and they just get sidelined because no one wants to think about 3 years transformation. So have you got any advice about how you can break those down into, my view is if a project can't be delivered in a year, it's probably going to get canned at some point. And how can you break it down in a way that's going to be self-sustaining and maybe let you go on to do other things?
I mean, the ideal is it starts to embed in the organisation. I think if you've got the transformation right, you start to not notice it's a transformation anymore. I think you probably do always need a bit of a push, especially if it's a significant change, and that does require some sort of a label like a transformation. I think, but at some point it has to be about embedding it back in, and that's only possible if you've got those coalitions across the organisation. You've started to embed those ways of working into teams that aren't within digital. That's not an easy thing to do, and it takes years and years to do that. And I think there's also should be a recognition that transformation is probably ongoing. There are always going to be change around the corner, and it's about building the resilience in the organisation to be able to react to that. But again, there's always going to be moments of another push again, which everyone will probably roll their eyes at.
Yeah, one of the stickers available from Public Digital is, fund teams, not projects. And I think that the thing is, if you have a project that's going to last a year, then either it will deliver something that then degrades in quality because nobody cares about it and nobody's budgeted to look after it after that year, or you could build a team that continues to iterate it. But that can be nice and boring. You can do that influencing piece where you just get a team and you help that one team be a bit better. Embed it from there.
Okay, please give it up for Katherine and Alex.